We are accustomed to thinking of time as an arrow. It travels in only one direction. From the past we remember to the future we do not know. The future is a fog, a realm of possibilities. No one can know what will happen tomorrow. Will stock prices fall? Will you meet the love of your life? Or will disaster strike out of the blue? This is a fundamental truth of our existence. But what if, in rare moments, during a glitch in the system, the fog lifts? What if the future is not what will be, but what already is? We just haven't reached it yet. And what if we can sometimes catch a glimpse of an event before it occurs? In 1898, 14 years before the most famous maritime disaster in history, an obscure writer named Morgan Robertson wrote a novella called Futility. In it, he described a gigantic ship. It was the largest, most luxurious, and according to its builders, unsinkable vessel ever constructed. The ship was named the Titan. In Robertson's book, the Titan embarks on its maiden voyage across the Atlantic, filled with wealthy passengers. It has a shortage of lifeboats because the owners deemed them unnecessary. On a cold April night, the Titan collides with an iceberg on its starboard side and sinks. Most of the people on board perish in the icy water. Now, let's recall reality. The year is 1912. The ship is the Titanic. Unsinkable. A shortage of lifeboats. An April night. A starboard side collision with an iceberg. The parallels extend beyond the plot. Robertson's Titan was 800 feet long. The Titanic was 882 feet long. The Titan's speed at impact was 25 knots. The Titanic's was 22.5 knots. Both had 3 propellers. When the Titanic sank, Robertson was hailed as a clairvoyant. He was hounded by journalists, but living in poverty and obscurity, he simply replied, "I am no prophet. I just know maritime matters." Skeptics argue that he merely extrapolated trends. Ships were getting bigger, and accidents were bound to happen. But the probability of the name, size, cause of sinking, month, and even the pattern of damage coinciding is astronomically small. It's a story that sends a chill down your spine. But it's literature, fiction that became reality. But what if we look at real people? At those who woke up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night, certain a loved one would die, even though that person was perfectly healthy? People who canceled their plane tickets an hour before departure because of a bad feeling, thereby saving their own lives? Science calls this cognitive bias, or coincidence. Parapsychologists call it precognition, foreknowledge. And historians simply preserve the documents, diaries, letters, police reports with certified dates. Evidence that the human brain sometimes acts like a receiver tuned to the tomorrow frequency. Today, we will open these archives. We will hear the story of the greatest American writer who saw his brother's death in vivid detail 2 weeks before the tragedy. We will travel to a small village in Wales, where an entire generation of children saw their own demise in a dream. And we will look at the computer screens at Princeton University, which seemed to predict September 11th, 4 hours before the first plane hit. Welcome to the twilight zone of reality, the realm of prophetic dreams. And we begin with a man known for his cynicism and rationalism. A man who didn't believe in God but was forced to believe in fate, Mark Twain. In 1858, a young Samuel Clemens, the future Mark Twain, was working as a riverboat pilot on the Mississippi. He loved the job and convinced his younger brother Henry to work as a clerk on the same steamboat, the Pennsylvania. Samuel and Henry were very close. One night, while the Pennsylvania was docked in St. Louis, Samuel had a dream. It was so vivid and detailed that when he woke up, he was convinced it had been real. He saw a metal coffin resting on 2 chairs in his sister's living room. Inside the coffin lay Henry. On Henry's chest was a bouquet of white flowers, and in its very center was a single crimson rose. The dream felt so real that Samuel got dressed and went for a walk, thinking about the funeral arrangements. It was only an hour later, when he was fully awake and saw the morning paper, that he realized, my God, it was a dream. Henry is alive. He told his sister about the dream. She, of course, told him to put such nonsense out of his head. A few days later, Samuel had a falling out with the captain of the Pennsylvania and transferred to another ship. Henry remained on board. They said their goodbyes. Samuel told him, "In case of trouble, Henry, help the passengers, but don't risk your own life." A few days later, near Memphis, the boilers of the steamboat Pennsylvania exploded. It was a horrific disaster, with hundreds killed and injured. Henry was thrown into the water by the blast wave. He suffered terrible lung burns from inhaling steam. Samuel rushed to the hospital in Memphis. He sat by his brother's bedside for 6 days and nights. Henry died in his arms, never regaining consciousness. The cause of death was an accidental overdose of morphine administered by the doctors. Samuel was crushed by grief and guilt. But the real shock was yet to come. The morgue in Memphis had run out of standard wooden coffins due to the large number of victims. But the wealthy ladies of Memphis, moved by Henry's youth, pooled their money and bought him a special coffin. A metal one. When Samuel entered the room where the body lay, his legs gave way. The coffin was resting on 2 chairs. It was a metal coffin, exactly like the one in his dream. But something was missing. The flowers. At that moment, an elderly woman entered the room. She didn't know Samuel. She had simply brought flowers to honor the deceased. She placed a bouquet of white flowers on Henry's chest. Samuel froze. In the center of the bouquet was a single red rose. The image from his dream, seen 2 weeks prior, was now complete. Down to the last pixel. Mark Twain lived a long life. He became a great writer, mocking religion and superstition. He was a founding member of the Society for Psychical Research, trying to find scientific explanations for the paranormal. But to the end of his days, he could not explain this incident. He called it my prophetic dream. And he blamed himself. Not for the boiler explosion, but for seeing the future and failing to understand it. If he had taken the dream literally, he might have forced Henry to leave the ship. But the problem with foresight is that it rarely comes with instructions. It comes as an image, a metaphor. Twain's case is a personal tragedy. One man, one dream, one death. But history knows examples where the shadow of the future fell over entire communities, where dozens of people saw the same darkness approaching. Welcome to Aberfan, a place where children's dreams became material evidence. The year is 1966. Aberfan, a small mining town in Wales. Above the town, on a mountainside, loomed a gigantic spoil tip from the coal mine, a black mountain of waste 111 feet high. The local residents had long feared it. It hung directly over the Pantglas Junior School. Underground springs beneath the tip made the waste unstable, but the National Coal Board ignored the complaints. On October 21st at 9:15 a.m., after a week of heavy rain, the spoil tip gave way. 140,000 cubic meters of coal slurry, a black, viscous avalanche, thundered down the mountain at 20 miles per hour. The landslide engulfed a farm, several houses, and struck the school directly. Classrooms were filled with sludge in seconds. 144 people died. Of those, 116 were children, nearly every student in the school. It was a national tragedy. But when psychiatrist Dr. John Barker arrived in the town, he discovered something that went beyond ordinary grief. He began hearing strange stories from the parents. A 10-year-old girl named Errol Mai Jones had told her mother the day before the disaster, "Mummy, I'm not afraid to die." Her mother was surprised. "Why are you talking about dying?" "You're so young." Errol replied, "Because I'll be with Peter and June." Her friends. Then she described a dream she'd had the night before. "I dreamt I went to school, but there was no school there. Something black had come down all over it." The next morning, Errol went to school and died. She was buried next to Peter and June in a mass grave. 3 days before the tragedy, an 8-year-old boy named Paul Davies drew a strange picture in his notebook, a hill with stick figures digging into it, and above them the words, "The End," in large letters. When his parents asked what it meant, he couldn't explain. Just the end. Paul also died in the landslide. There were many such stories, and not just from the children. A woman in Plymouth, 200 miles from Aberfan, dreamt of a coal avalanche, screaming children, and black mud the night before. A woman in London woke up at 9:15 a.m. on October 21st, the exact moment of impact, with a feeling of suffocation, as if the walls were closing in and something heavy was falling on her. Dr. Barker was astonished. He decided to conduct a study, placing an ad in a newspaper. "If you had a dream or premonition of the Aberfan disaster before it happened, please write to me." He received 76 letters. Of course, many could be dismissed as fantasy or false memory. I knew it all along. But Barker identified 24 cases that had documentary evidence. People had told their dreams to friends, doctors, or recorded them in diaries before October 21st. One of the most striking cases was that of Mrs. Monica Gilbert. 2 weeks before the disaster, she dreamed she was standing in mud, surrounded by the ruins of a school. She saw a girl being carried out on a stretcher, alive but with a broken leg. Most importantly, she saw a specific rescuer wearing a strange cap. When she watched the news report on television, she screamed. She saw the very same girl and the very same rescuer, wearing the same cap. Barker was convinced this was no coincidence. A mass tragedy creates a powerful emotional impulse, a shockwave of grief. And this wave, it seemed, traveled not only through space but also through time. It moved backward, into the past, where sensitive people picked it up as an echo from the future. This discovery changed Barker's life. He concluded that premonition was not mysticism, but a resource that could be used to save lives. Thus, the strangest scientific organization of the 20th century was born. The Premonitions Bureau, a place where dreams were sorted like mail, and where an attempt was made to find the formula for fate. In 1967, in the wake of the Aberfan tragedy, Dr. John Barker, along with journalist Peter Fairley, founded the British Premonitions Bureau. The idea was simple yet ambitious, to create a central database for all premonitions and prophetic dreams. They appealed to the nation, "Send us your dreams." And people began to write. Hundreds, then thousands of letters poured in. It was an attempt to move from anecdotes to statistics. A dream about your aunt breaking her leg is interesting but useless. But if 20 people from different parts of the country have the same dream about a train crash, that's a signal. Barker wanted to create an early warning system, a seismograph for fate. Sometimes it worked. In 1968, the Bureau received 2 independent letters from an architect, Alan Hencher, and a music teacher, Miss Lorna Middleton. Both described the same dream, a train derailing on the line between London and Edinburgh. They saw twisted rails and overturned carriages. Hencher even sketched the crash site. Barker forwarded the information to British Rail. He knew he sounded like a madman, but he had to try. The skeptics at the railway company laughed it off, but decided to conduct an extra track inspection, just in case. Sometime later, they discovered a fractured rail on that very section of the line. A disaster was averted. But more often, the Bureau faced the problem of noise. The predictions were too vague. I saw a plane crash. Which one? Where? When? Or they were too precise, but only after the event had already occurred. The Bureau lasted for just over a year before closing due to a lack of funding and ridicule from the press. The experiment had failed, but it left behind a chilling postscript. In 1968, Dr. John Barker, the Bureau's founder, died suddenly from a ruptured blood vessel in his brain. He was only 44. While sorting through his archives, Peter Fairley found a prediction. It had come from one of the Bureau's most reliable seers, Lorna Middleton, the same woman who predicted the train incident. In a letter received 6 months before Barker's death, she wrote, "Dear Dr. Barker, I have had a dream of your death. It will be soon, sudden, and it will be connected with your head." Barker had wanted to use foresight to cheat death, but it turned out that knowing the future doesn't grant the power to change it. Precognition is like watching a movie in which you are an actor. You know what happens in the next scene, but you cannot change the script. Barker's experiment was analog, paper, pens, postage stamps. But what if you applied machines to this task? Computers that work 24/7, analyzing not dreams, but pure data. What if it's not just human consciousness that has premonitions? What if the noosphere itself, the global information field, can sense what's coming? Princeton University. The 1990s. A group of scientists begins an experiment that will lead to one of the most shocking discoveries in the history of parapsychology. The project was called the Global Consciousness Project. The idea was based on previous research suggesting that human consciousness could influence random processes. The scientists placed about 70 devices around the world called random event generators, or REGs. And REG is essentially an electronic coin flipper, a small black box that generates completely random numbers, zeros and ones, every second. According to the laws of statistics, over a long period, the number of zeros and ones should be roughly equal, 50,050. The graph should look like chaotic, white noise. And most of the time it did. But sometimes the chaos vanished. The scientists noticed that during major global events, when millions of people were experiencing the same powerful emotion, the REG graphs deviated from the norm. The random numbers ceased to be random. A pattern emerged. This happened during the funeral of Princess Diana, during the Oklahoma City bombing, and during major earthquakes. It was as if the collective consciousness of humanity, focused on a single event, created a kind of field that influenced the electronics. But the most terrifying discovery was made on the morning of September 11, 2001. The first plane struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center at 8:46 a.m. Eastern Time. But the random event generators around the world began showing an anomaly 4 hours earlier. Starting around 4:30 a.m., the graph of deviation from the norm began to climb sharply. The laws of mathematics were breaking down. Numbers that should have been chaotic were suddenly falling into order. By the time the first plane hit, the odds of this being a random deviation were 35 to 1. By the time the second tower fell, the odds against chance had skyrocketed to 1,000 to 1. It was the largest deviation ever recorded in the project's history. What does this mean? Theory 1. The terrorists, who knew about the impending attack, infected the global field with their focused consciousness. But there were only 19 of them, far too few to influence 70 generators worldwide. Theory 2. A premonition. Perhaps millions of people around the world subconsciously felt the coming catastrophe. An unconscious anxiety, bad dreams, a general sense of unease. This collective unconscious fear created the anomaly. The machines recorded what people were feeling but could not yet comprehend. It's similar to how animals sense an impending earthquake. They detect infrasound or changes in the magnetic field. Could humanity also possess a kind of sixth sense, a seismograph for the future? But how is this possible from a physics standpoint? How can information travel backward in time? The answer may lie in the strangest and most counterintuitive theory about the nature of reality, a theory supported by Einstein himself. The block universe theory. The idea that past, present, and future are merely stubborn illusions of the human mind. We're used to thinking of time as a river. It flows, it changes. The past is gone, the future has not yet arrived. There is only now. But Einstein's theory of relativity tells us something different. It unified space and time into a single four-dimensional structure, space-time. In this model, the universe is not a river, it's a frozen lake, or, as physicists call it, a block. Imagine the entire history of the universe, from the Big Bang to its eventual heat death, existing simultaneously as a single object. Past, present, and future are simply different coordinates within this block. It's like a reel of film. It has already been shot. On it, there is a frame of your birth. There is a frame of you watching this video, and there is a frame of your death. All these frames exist at the same time, coiled in the canister. Our consciousness is the projector's beam. It moves along the film, illuminating one frame after another, creating the illusion that time flows and that only now exists. But it's an illusion. Our now is just one of trillions of no's that exist in the block. For the dinosaurs, their now is just as real as ours. Einstein wrote to a friend after his sister's death, "For us believing physicists, the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion." If this theory is correct, then the future has already happened. It is already recorded in space-time. And in that case, precognition is not magic. It's just a glimpse of information from an adjacent frame on the film reel. Our brain, being a quantum system, might occasionally read information not from now, but from tomorrow. As if the projector's beam flickers for a second and illuminates the wrong frame. This would explain why premonitions are so vague and symbolic. We don't see a clear picture, but rather a shadow of the event, static from a neighboring radio station. It's a beautiful and elegant theory. It removes the mysticism and replaces it with physics. But it has a terrifying consequence. If the future is already written, then we have no free will. All our decisions, all our choices, are just part of a script we cannot change. Like Mark Twain, who saw his brother's death but could not stop it. Like the children of Aberfan, who saw the Black Mountain but still went to school. But before we descend into existential dread, let's listen to the voice of reason. The voice that tells us this is all just mathematics. And coincidence, the law of large numbers. It mercilessly shatters the most beautiful mystical theories. Skeptics offer a simple, cold, and perfectly logical explanation for the phenomenon of prophetic dreams. Statistics. Let's do the math. There are 8 billion people on the planet. Let's assume each person has an average of 2 or 3 dreams per night. This means that every night, humanity generates around 20 billion dreams. 20 billion dreams every single night. In these dreams, everything imaginable happens. People fly. People die. There are crashes, fires, and earthquakes. By the law of large numbers, some of these billions of dreams are bound to coincide with real events by pure chance. It's not a miracle. It's a mathematical inevitability. Imagine shooting a shotgun at a wall for 1,000,000 years. The wall would be covered in random holes. But one day, you might accidentally create the Mona Lisa with the pellet marks. Does that make you a brilliant artist? No. It just means you made enough attempts. When a plane crashes, we hear the story of the person who canceled their ticket because of a bad feeling. We call them lucky, gifted with foresight. But we don't hear the stories of the thousands of people who also had a bad feeling, yet their planes landed safely. And we don't hear the stories of people who had a great feeling, but whose planes crashed. This is called survivorship bias. We focus only on the cases that confirm the theory and ignore those that refute it. Even the story of the Titanic in Robertson's book fits this model. In the 19th century, many books were written about maritime disasters. It was a popular genre. Ships were getting larger, and icebergs were a known threat. We simply remember the one book that hit the bullseye. We've forgotten the hundreds of others whose predictions never came true. This argument is powerful. It explains 99% of all cases. Coincidences happen. Our brain is a pattern-seeking machine. It sees connections where none exist. But what about the remaining 1%? Statistics can explain general coincidences. I dreamed of a fire, and a fire happened. But it struggles to explain specific details. It doesn't explain Mark Twain's metal coffin and the single red rose on a bouquet of white ones. It doesn't explain why 24 people in Aberfan saw not just a tragedy, but specifically an avalanche of black sludge covering a school. It doesn't explain why the random event generators showed an anomaly on September 11th and not on any other day. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Most cases are a game of statistics, but some are something else. Something that may be built into us at the deepest biological level.